Thank you for your patience. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes for the ranking member, and then we'll get started. Thanks. We're going to get started, and the ranking member will join us momentarily. The subcommittee will come to order. Welcome to this important hearing entitled A Review and Assessment of the Fiscal Year 2019 Budget Request for the Department of Defense Science and Technology Programs. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis recently testified that, quote, "Our competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, air, land, sea, space, and cyber," end quote. And I couldn't agree more. Our committee and the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee in particular has spent a considerable amount of time reviewing and understanding adversarial threats, most notably from China and Russia, while also keeping an eye on emerging technologies such as quantum science, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, autonomy, and robotics. We have seen troubling adversarial advances in warfighting systems like hypersonics and directed energy, and adversarial advances in enabling technologies to include high-performance computing and artificial intelligence. We have also learned that many of our adversaries continue to increase their research and development budgets and implement national-level strategic plans. Russia has increased their basic research budget by nearly 25%, and the Chinese have national-level plans for science and technology, as well as an approach to lead the world in AI by 2030. All of these signs point to top-down, government-driven agendas that provide resources and roadmaps for strategic collaboration between industry, academia, and civil society. These efforts could propel Russia and China to continue to leap ahead in many of the technology sectors we will talk about today. But adversarial dominance is not a foregone conclusion. What we learn today and in future hearings must be translated into action to inform and reform the Department of Defense in support of national level efforts in order that the United States remains home to the world's leading experts, researchers, and technological breakthroughs. Artificial intelligence is one sweeping area that I am particularly interested in from a national security perspective. Next week, I plan to introduce standalone legislation that will start the discussion on how we should better organize our government to understand and leverage AI. I look forward to working with my colleagues on the committee and also with the Department of Defense as we craft solutions for this year's NDAA. Given these challenges, I am very pleased to see a total of $13.7 billion for science and technology in the Department of Defense budget request, an approximate $500 million increase and 2.3% of the total defense budget. But despite this increase, I remain concerned that our S&T investments represent a small percentage of our overall defense budget. To truly increase lethality and provide a superior technological edge for our warfighters, we should ask ourselves if 2.3% of the total defense budget is the correct balance. A properly resourced science and technology enterprise in the long run reduces risk and, when properly executed, can generate efficiencies within the department, something we need to keep in mind amidst debates on sequestration and continuing resolutions. Now, more than ever, our S&T enterprise and investments play a strategic role and are central to our national and economic security. This hearing also marks our first open S&T event since the National Defense Authorization Act directed the reestablishment of the position of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering within the department. And as I have said in previous statements, I firmly believe that the Undersecretary for R&E needs to be the prime mover to drive change and foster innovation within the department. A primary mission of this office should be to provide distinct direction and leadership to energize the defense industrial base, the military services, combatant commanders, and the Department of Defense labs. It must also guide newer initiatives such as the Strategic Capabilities Office, the Defense Innovation Unit, Experimental or DIUX, and even the Algorithmic Warfare Working Group and the Defense Digital Service. And while many of these new initiatives have created tremendous momentum and energized a conversation about changing the culture of the Department of Defense, much more needs to be done to make these more than one-off quick gains. If properly empowered and resourced, I also believe that the Undersecretary for R&E will be in a unique position to drive a national-level dialogue for S&T policy that will, in addition to helping maintain a battlefield advantage, energize our domestic industrial and innovation bases, and provide technology jobs and opportunities across many of the sectors we will talk about today. So we have significant expectations, clearly, of Dr. Mike Griffin and his office, but we do so while also offering our support and confidence because the threats we face from our adversaries demand that we energize and organize our government to ensure that policy indeed keeps pace with technology. So to help us with this important topic today, we welcome 5 distinguished witnesses, starting with my left, Ms. Mary Miller, performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Dr. Stephen Walker, Director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, Dr. Tom Russell, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Research and Technology, Rear Admiral David Hahn, Chief of Naval Research, and Mr. Jeff Stanley, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Science, Technology, and Engineering. Welcome to all of our witnesses, and we look forward to your testimony. I want to welcome my friend and ranking member, Jim Langevin, whose timing is indeed perfect. And when he gets situated, I would like to recognize him for any opening comments he'd like to make. Thank you, Jim. I know today's been a busy day for all of us, so.
It worked out well. I actually literally just flew in a little while ago because of the nor'easter we received yesterday. I got snowed out and was not able to get in until this afternoon. So anyway, welcome to our witnesses. Thank you for all for being here. And regrettably, I understand Secretary Griffin was unable to join us today. Although I recognize that he was just recently confirmed, and I understand his vision for science and technology and innovation as the first Undersecretary of Research and Engineering is paramount for the subcommittee, and I certainly look forward to engaging him in the very near future. And I appreciate, though, that Ms. Miller is here, that you're here representing the Office of Secretary of Defense, R&E Enterprise, and it's good to see you again. Today we begin consideration of fiscal year 2019 budget request for S&T across the Department of Defense that totals $13.7 billion, up from $13.2 billion requested in FY 2018. The amount requested for advanced development and prototyping is $20.8 billion, $3 billion more than requested in FY 18, for a total of $34.5 billion requested for R&E activities. This budget request comes on the heels of the recently released National Defense Strategy that highlights specific technological advancements that the U.S. needs to leverage to maintain its warfighting edge. Many of these are in areas this subcommittee has supported over the years, including artificial intelligence, directed energy, hypersonics, 3D printing, and autonomous systems. The NDS also highlights long-term strategic competition with China and Russia and the need for an unparalleled national security innovation base. It's no secret that China is employing measures that encroach upon, poach from, and steal from us to further their objectives to be an R&E powerhouse and degrade our warfighting edge. This is utterly alarming and greatly affects our national security. Unfortunately, China is not the only nation conducting such activities. They are, however, one of the few state actors that has coupled such tactics with considerable money and other resources behind a national strategy that involves a whole-of-government effort that, and leverages society to promote indigenous innovation. If the U.S. is to remain a global leader in technology, then we just can't play defense. We must also play offense. Efforts to deter and counter China and other actors that threaten our ability to maintain our technological edge are absolutely critical, as are investments in science and research, prototyping, and other development efforts to advance warfighting capabilities and to promote deterrence. No less important are investments in STEAM education and programs that develop junior talent into future tech leaders, and the implementation of strategic policies that promote a sound economic and political environment on U.S. soil where global collaboration, discovery, innovation, public institutions, and industry can thrive. We must also balance participation in the global S&T and innovation environment and with protection of national security interests. Clearly, this cannot be done through DOD alone, however. DOD has a significant role to play as a customer and driver of S&T innovation. DOD S&T ecosystem includes science, technology, and reinvention laboratories that house some of our nation's greatest assets and people. It also includes DARPA, which is invested in some of the pie-in-the-sky ideas that came to fruition and change how we fight and how we live. They have absolutely lived up to what our expectations are to invest in those high-risk, high-payoff initiatives and avoid technological surprise wherever possible. Over the course of many years, Congress has worked tirelessly to provide authorities and legislation that enable these institutions to be utilized to their fullest potential by the Department. Tools such as the Rapid Innovation Fund and Small Business Innovation Research Program have been provided to DOD to leverage commercial innovation and have proven beneficial to that end. DIUX and other entities have stood up to enable the Department to make use of commercial technology and tech advancements. However, I believe DOD can make better use of these tools as well. DOD also administers the Research and Education Program for Historically Black Colleges and Universities and National Defense Education Programs, which I'm pleased to say received funding increases this year, although I believe those increases should be bigger. These programs enhance DOD's S&T efforts and produce top talent for the future workforce. The NDS framework and the recent reorganization by DOD by Congress to separate program acquisition and sustainment from research and engineering provide the Department an opportunity to rethink how it approaches delivering the most advanced capabilities to the warfighter in the near, mid, and long term, and to bridge the valley of death. In the era of strategic state competition, it's time to get creative, and we must outsmart our competitors and our adversaries. Today, I look forward to hearing about how the NDS is shaping DOD's R&D landscape, how the budget request reflects investment being made that serves DOD's interests as both a consumer and driver of technology advancements, and how DOD is leveraging its ecosystem to the fullest extent so that we may remain the global technology leader. With that, I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for putting this hearing together, and with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Jim. We now turn to our witnesses. Thank you for being here today. Your written statements were submitted for the record, so please summarize your opening comments within 5 minutes or less. And I'll start with Assistant Secretary Miller. You have 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the State of the Department's Science and Technology Program for fiscal year 2019. I am proud to be here today representing the newly confirmed Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Dr. Mike Griffin, and the scientists and engineers within the DOD S&T enterprise. We are in an era of constant competition. We see nations like China and Russia investing heavily in research, trying to close the technology gap with the U.S. We see high-end military technology that has diffused to many countries that would have been unable to develop it themselves, even reaching some non-state actors. In a world with near equal access to technology, speed is becoming the discriminator. Not just speed of discovery, but speed of delivery. How fast we can develop, adopt, or leverage technology to meet the warfighter's needs and get it into their hands will determine our ability to outpace our adversaries. Under Dr. Griffin's leadership, I look forward to instilling within the Department a culture that embraces a more agile approach to development and delivery. You've been briefed countless times that our adversaries have spent decades watching us, how we conduct our warfare, how we fight. They've seen our equipment, watched our tactics, techniques, and procedures, and determined our concepts of operations. They've assessed both our strengths and vulnerabilities and strategically invested in capabilities to mitigate our advantages and exploit areas of perceived weakness. China, for example, has sustained increased defense spending since the early 2000s with the fundamental goal of dominating the next generation of military and civilian technologies by 2050, making them both a military and an economic superpower. They have prioritized their research and development in areas that they believe will help them achieve this goal. Areas such as advanced materials and manufacturing, hypersonics weapons, advanced computing, artificial intelligence, and robotics, to name a few. Similarly, Russia has reemerged on the world stage and is pursuing force modernization while actively seeking to manipulate and dominate the global information environment. Meanwhile, North Korea conducts cyber operations to achieve a range of offensive effects with little or no warning and continues to flaunt their emerging ballistic missile capabilities on a frequent basis. These threats span the air, land, sea, space, and cyber domains, which have all experienced dramatic capability advancement throughout the world. These advancements, coupled with our adversaries' commitment to a pace of prototyping, experimentation, and fielding that far outstrips our own, present a formidable challenge to our U.S. forces operating around the globe. In this competitive environment, the Department must pay much more attention to future readiness and ensure our conventional overmatch remains over time. We must be willing and able to tap into commercial research, recognize its military potential, and develop new capabilities and operational and organizational constructs to employ them faster than our competitors. This would not be possible without our DOD scientists and engineers who are doing groundbreaking and innovative work. They are embracing these hard challenges our military faces every day, seeking to better understand the warfighter's problems and working diligently on affordable and effective solutions. The Department is addressing critical technology and capability gaps through a combination of adaptation of existing systems, such as efforts conducted through the Strategic Capabilities Office, and the development and introduction of innovative new technologies through our DOD labs and centers, DARPA, and DIUX. We recognize that our adversaries present us with a challenge of a sophisticated, evolving threat. We are prepared to meet that challenge and restore the technical overmatch of the United States Armed Forces through focus and innovation. Thank you for your strong interest in and support of the Department's science and technology efforts as we work to discover, design, and deliver technology capabilities our warfighters will need now and in the future. I appreciate this opportunity to testify on this important issue, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Walker.
Can you hear me? Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Chairwoman Stefanik and Ranking Member Langevin, for having me here today. For 60 years, DARPA has held to this singular, enduring mission to develop breakthrough technologies and capabilities for national security. The genesis of that mission and of DARPA itself dates back to a commitment that President Eisenhower made that the United States would always be the initiator of strategic surprise. Working with innovators inside and outside of government, DARPA has repeatedly delivered on that mission, transforming revolutionary concepts and even seeming impossibilities into practical capabilities for the U.S. and allied warfighter. In the 6 decades since DARPA was established, the world has changed dramatically. These changes include some remarkable and even astonishing scientific and technological advances that, if wisely and purposefully used, have the potential not only to ensure ongoing U.S. military superiority and security, but also to catalyze societal and economic advances. At the same time, the world is experiencing deeply disturbing geopolitical shifts that pose real threats to U.S. preeminence and stability. These dueling trends of unprecedented opportunity and risk deeply inform DARPA's strategic investment decisions moving forward. My priorities for investment are very much aligned with President Trump's national security strategy and with Secretary Mattis's national defense strategy. So my priorities for investment in the future are defending the homeland, number one, from varied threats to include developing cyber deterrence capabilities, biosurveillance and bioprotection technologies, and the ability to sense and defend against weapons of mass terror. Number two, deterring and prevailing against peer competitors in Europe and Asia will require new thinking. The U.S. can no longer be dominant across all scenarios, but it needs to be highly lethal in select ones. Realizing new capabilities across all the physical domains will be important, and hypersonics will be a key technology there. But we also have to look at space and the electromagnetic spectrum domains. They're going to be very important for that fight. Number 3, effectively prosecuting stabilization efforts across the globe requires us to get better at fighting differently and in different environments. Capabilities to address gray zone conflict and 3D city-scale warfare, along with the development of rigorous and reliable models to predict adversarial moves will be critical. Last but definitely not least is number 4, foundational research in science and technology. This will underlie all of DARPA's granted pursuits and is what makes possible never-before-seen capabilities. We must continue to do what I think DARPA does better than anyone, and that's to follow where technology can lead us to solve the country's toughest challenges. One of the foundational technology paths we're on currently is to help recreate advanced electronics. DARPA's had a key role over the years in advancing the state-of-the-art in advanced electronics, especially semiconductors. Today, the advanced electronics industry is at an inflection point. Design and fabrication of semiconductors is becoming ever more difficult and costly. China, which is significantly behind the U.S. now, has decided to invest huge sums of government-directed private capital to acquire today's onshore semiconductor design and manufacturing capability. In 2018, DARPA launched the Electronics Resurgence Initiative, or ERI, which aims to create leap-ahead technology that will develop new materials, new circuit design tools, and new system architectures and manufacturing capabilities for the U.S. semiconductor industry and for our defense sector to keep us out in front. As DARPA looks to its next 60 years, it promises to continue to be a bold, risk-tolerant investor in high-impact technologies so the nation can be the first to develop and adopt the novel capabilities made possible by such work. With the continued support of Congress, and especially this committee, as well as the backing of the Pentagon and my S&T partners on this panel, we will succeed. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. Dr. Russell.
Chairwoman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to discuss the United States Army's Program for Science and Technology for fiscal year 2019. This committee plays a vital role in supporting Army S&T as the program seeks to ensure the Army can operate and dominate in complex environments. These environments pose a variety of challenges characterized by adaptive adversaries employing conventional, unconventional, and hybrid methods designed to challenge U.S. national security. The Army's and the joint future operational environment will demand a land power dominance with increased flexibility, adaptability, and speed of responsiveness. As a means to address current capability shortfalls and outpace anticipated threats, the Army S&T strategy pursues a foundational technology development for future and leverages organic capacity and the capacity of our partners. Army S&T is the only portfolio focused on the Army's future investments. It makes investments today in fundamental science and technology initiatives that will ensure breakthroughs that will yield affordable, decisive, and advantages for the future. The S&T portfolio is now being rebalanced to meet the Army's needs to prepare for and deter possible near-peer threats in the mid and far term. Based on the Chief of Staff of the Army's guidance, the S&T community with our stakeholders reviewed the entire S&T portfolio and concluded that the existing portfolio was out of balance, with too great of a focus on the near term and technology developments focused on the counterinsurgency fight versus the near-peer threats. The Secretary and the Chief of Staff's modernization initiatives have further focused the S&T program on the Army's top priorities, while maintaining vital long-term research into the cutting edges of military-relevant science. As a result, greater than $1 billion in S&T funding was redirected from near-term efforts and projects to mid-term projects, reducing investments in counterinsurgency programs, and increasing and accelerating investments in technologies to prepare for and deter possible near-peer threats. This portfolio rebalance is impacting budget years 19 through 23, which will allow S&T to maintain a balanced portfolio investment to guide breakthrough science and research and technology innovation. The Army's S&T program fully supports the 6 key modernization priorities: long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical lift, network C3I, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. S&T also pursues the broader basic and applied research that will create new capabilities and prevent technological surprise, including but not limited to 8 key technology investments: directed energy, artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, virtual reality, energetic materials, and ultra-design materials. In addition, state-of-the-art technical facilities are essential to ensuring that the Army's S&T enterprise is positioned for discovery and maturation of critical technologies. An enterprise-wide approach to modernize is centered on 3 primary thrusts: organic technical infrastructure, informing construction of our partner facilities, and infrastructure collaboration such as the ARL Open Campus business model. Our S&T strategy provides a unifying framework for Army labs and our industry and academic partners to collaboratively mature new technologies. In addition to the 12,000 scientists and engineers in our S&T enterprise, the Army labs and the Research Development Engineering Centers are critical assets for the Army. They have delivered key capabilities in support of ongoing combat operations and will continue to do so in the future. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. Rear Admiral Hahn.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Chairwoman, ranking member, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your leadership. So the opening comments of the chair, I think, provide a pretty good summary of the state of affairs. And I think the significant term there is the advantage has eroded. Those who have gone before you in the seats that you sit in what used to be called the Naval Affairs Committee, back in the year 1946, we're going through a similar conversation about how do we sustain science and technology and all that we had learned throughout the conflict of World War II to ensure that we don't repeat those same lessons going forward. So that group, the Naval Affairs Committee, stood up the Office of Naval Research. And I find the words in the legislation that created the Office of Naval Research continues to provide us our mission statement today. So I think it's important that we think about that for a moment. And I'm going to read those words to you because that's what gives us our charge. So in your legislation, it says that my charge is to plan, foster, and encourage scientific research in recognition of its paramount importance as related to the maintenance of future naval power and the preservation of national security. So those words echo the theme that as a maritime nation, without naval power in the present and in the future, we will find ourselves at a disadvantage. The National Defense Strategy lays out pretty clearly, I think, that naval power is going to be very important in this great power competition that we find ourselves in yet again. So it's my charge to figure out how naval power is going to get generated through the elements of science and technology. I think it's pretty clear to the members of the committee that naval power comes from a combination in balance of capacity, capability, and lethality. And science and technology are at the heart of every one of those elements of naval power. Your United States Navy and Marine Corps is going to play the away game every single time. So my charge is to make sure that we're the first to field, to take advantage of the speed of technology that's being created each day, and to figure out a way to get that into programs of record where that capability gets to scale, and do it in a more and more lethal and a more and more creative way every single day, leveraging all those pieces of the puzzle that got put together back again in our experience in World War II and that we leverage going forward to today. And you mentioned the 3 legs of that stool. It's academia, it's our industry partners, and it's our government workforce that understands how naval warfighting looks and what technologies will apply to the naval warfight in the future. And those are the ones we invest in and we try to carry forward. So there's good news here, right? Your leadership and your investment in a continued and steady way across the years has created a workforce of over 4,000 in my part of the enterprise and an analogous number and the same kind of talent across this whole team here. And it's our job to keep that team moving in the same direction, to leverage each other's investment and make the best of it. So I am happy to take all the questions. I look forward to the dialogue, and I couldn't be more proud than to sit here with the members of my team. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stanley.
Chairwoman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, Members of the subcommittee and staff, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to testify on the Air Force's FY19 Science and Technology program. Challenge and threats to our national security are evolving rapidly. In some cases, our near-peer competitors are matching or exceeding our nation in capabilities. The Air Force has taken action on multiple fronts to change the way we leverage science and technology. The Secretary of the Air Force recently commissioned a broad-reaching initiative to assess our science and technology investment strategy to ensure our dominance across air, space, and cyber. Because of a variety of factors, the Defense Department is no longer driving the industrial base like it did 10 or 20 years ago. The Secretary's initiative is looking across industry, academia, the national laboratories, and other agencies to see where we need to invest in technology and how we might change our processes and business approach. Change is necessary, and the Air Force is committed to ensuring our warfighters have the best technological advantage we can give them. Additionally, we have pivoted in several game-changing technology areas to amplify the enduring attributes of air power: speed, range, flexibility, and precision. To do this, the Air Force has partnered with our other services and agencies to accelerate the delivery of these technologies. We've partnered with DARPA on our hypersonics developments and initiated 2 follow-on developments. We recently completed a directed energy flight plan and are in lockstep with the Navy and the Army to demonstrate and mature high-energy lasers, high-powered microwaves for base defense, aircraft self-protection, and other tactical situations. Attritable systems like the low-cost attritable aircraft technology effort will change future air battles. Teaming with commercial industry, the Air Force has leveraged several advances in additive and 3D manufacturing technologies, research into limited life design methodologies, and advanced composites to create a family of vehicles like LCAT, which are not only lethal, but impose cost on our adversaries. The space industry landscape continues to change, and we are aggressively pursuing low-cost access to orbit for payloads and microsatellites with programs like Eagle, which will launch next month. It's not only the technologies in which the Air Force invests that's important, but the pace at which the Air Force innovates and responds. Global competition has changed the speed at which the world around us operates. The Air Force recognizes that it is not the country that innovates the best, but rather innovates and applies technology the fastest. I want to thank the Congress for the recent NDA language regarding prototyping. Prototyping allows us to bridge the gap between science and technology and programs of record and deliver capabilities at the speed the warfighter needs. Lastly, the global competition for technology and the pace of technology development directly translates to the workforce. The workforce for science, technology, and engineering continues to be our most important resource. This is a national issue, and the demand for technical talent is far outpacing degree production in the United States. We are appreciative of the continued support from Congress through flexible personnel authorities. The Air Force continues to utilize these authorities to ensure we attract and retain the world-class workforce capable of providing these revolutionary capabilities for our warfighters. In summary, as the Air Force budget request highlights, the Air Force senior leadership is committed to science and technology and driving innovation across our enterprise. I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stanley. Before we get to questions, I ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's briefing after all the subcommittee members have had any opportunity to ask questions. Is there objection? Without objection, non-subcommittee members will be recognized at the appropriate time for 5 minutes. Moving along to questions, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I plan to introduce standalone legislation next week on artificial intelligence. And I understand that the department is currently working an AI strategy being led by the Undersecretary for R&E's office. So Ms. Miller, can you provide this committee with an update on that initiative, and there are ways that we can be helpful with this and similar efforts?
Yes, ma'am. So I guess it was last September, we decided that, we needed to start pulling together what everybody was doing in the world of artificial intelligence within the Department of Defense. And we had an opening conference and invited people within the department that were working in artificial intelligence and some external folks to come in and tell us where they are. We were surprised by the breadth that this area has expanded because everybody has a way to use artificial intelligence. They can envision it. We started doing weekly meetings with people within the Department of Defense, over 40 organizations, over 150 people typically any given week that come to talk about what they are doing and how they are investing and what their needs are. Through this effort, we have been trying to shape an understanding of what we are spending our resources in, and then to try to organize those efforts into something that would apply to the National Defense Strategy and where we need to go. You have to understand what people are doing and then figure out how you need to shape it into the end state of what the department needs. So we've got 5 aspects that we are looking, 5 goals that we're looking at. One is foundational. We need to establish a workforce that is in understanding artificial intelligence. We need to create partnerships. We need to understand and acquire data so you can actually train your intelligent agent. We need to develop standards and the policy to be able to use artificial intelligence in many of the ways the department would need. Our second goal is to be able to attain technical superiority. So the foundations of what AI is, machine learning that we are working on, data analytics, robotics, advanced computing that allows us to exercise artificial intelligence, and how humans and AI can work together to give better capability to the warfighter. We've looked at how we can apply, third goal, how we apply AI to business functions, because the Secretary of Defense has made business reform his #3 priority in the department. The more we can save through our business reform, the more we can spend on achieving and attaining that lethality that he desires for the Department of Defense. So we're looking at how do you apply AI to not only training and education, but finances, the medical field, and what we do in contracts, acquisition, and legal activities. And looking at effective intelligence analysis. You've heard about Project Maven. That is clearly kind of our set of how data analytics and artificial intelligence can better inform a warfighter. So we have this whole intel side of this as well. And ultimately, we are trying to get to lethality, and that's where we take artificial intelligence and apply it to what we are doing in command and control and communications and survivability in the breadth of what the department's doing.
I want to give the other witnesses an opportunity to answer questions as well on this topic. Dr. Walker, can you thank you, Ms. Miller. Dr. Walker, can you discuss your AI efforts within DARPA, and then understanding we are in an unclassified forum, are there any adversarial concerns regarding AI that are on your radar that you can share with us today?
Sure. DARPA's been involved in AI since 1960, when we wrote our information office director wrote the first paper, Man-Computer Symbiosis. So we've had a hand in much of the development along the way. Where we're really focused now, much of the commercial sector is applying what we call machine learning, which is sort of what we look at as second generation AI. What we're focused on now is third generation, and that is, machine learning requires, large data sets. You train, it really should be called machine training. You're training a machine over a large data set to recognize patterns, et cetera. What we're focused on is third generation AI, where and the environment is changing, and so the data set is changing, and how does the machine react to that? Can it still give you a good answer? And so we have a program called Explainable AI that's not just spitting out an answer with a probability of correctness, but actually looking at the machine gives you an answer and it tells you how it got to that answer, why it came up with that answer. That's one example of a program in our third generation effort. Another one is lifelong learning for machines. And so when a piece of data changes, the environment changes, how does the machine respond to that, and how does it get back up on a correct answer? In terms of your second part of your question, what is the adversary doing? It's well known that adversaries as well as others are able to manipulate images and videos using AI techniques. We have a program called Metaphor, which is looking at applying AI techniques to understand when images, when videos have been tampered with, to provide some truth-telling in that scenario.
Thank you. Mr. Langevin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I certainly look forward to co-sponsoring the legislation that you're introducing. And you know, I also hope when we talk about standards, that we're also proceeding with well thought out caution as well, that we understand where this is going and doesn't get too far ahead of us that we can't control it, as we saw recently with the experiment that got shut down with the Facebook AI talking to each other and started talking to each other in a language that we didn't know what it was, and they had to shut it down. And again, understanding where this is going and proceeding with both, trying to innovate as much as possible, but also make sure it doesn't get away from us. I'm going to switch over to another area, just more broadly to all witnesses. How is the National Defense Strategy shaped how we think about our DT&E, and how does the fiscal year 2019 budget request reflect a new approach that is different from the third offset strategy developed in the DOD under former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter? And what is the status of long-range research and development planning activities? I want to start with Ms. Miller.
So I would tell you that the National Defense Strategy, we were part of the development of that, had a lot of discussions primarily on where the department needs to go to modernize and what we needed to think in that area. We have started to resonate, and it can't be just about systems anymore. It needs to be about missions that have to be accomplished. And in that context, when you look at what is out there today and what needs to be out there in the future to accomplish the mission, that is where you start to see science and technology play a larger role, and you will start to see investments that will be mission-oriented to give us options. The Secretary of Defense has asked for many options to prosecute these missions, and that's what we will bring forward. Regarding the long-range research and development program plan, we intended all along to do this on a quadrennial basis, to get people together, to think outside of the box, to not be constrained by how we currently fight, and we do intend to do that. Probably be 3 years from now.
Thank you.
To follow on to Ms. Miller, for me, DARPA's looking at the NDS very, very closely, especially in the area of lethality, and applying, trying to think through how to deter and prevail our peer competitors in key areas of the globe. One of the areas that we have been working in and will continue in a bigger way to work is hypersonics to enable that greater lethality. We're working with our partners to do that, and I hope to talk a little bit more about that, but I want to give them a chance.
So that, the question was also about the long-range research development planning. I think you'll see in the Army S&T program, it's really been rebalanced to look towards a near-peer threat, and it's really a threat-based approach, looking at what are the challenges we face in a land battle. And the focus has been driven towards 6 modernization priorities, and those 6 modernization priorities were designed around the ideas of the fundamental functions of warfighting on land, which is how do I move, shoot, communicate, and protect. And in those areas, there are applications or science and technology programs which are looking at how do I extend the range of artillery, how do I extend the missile range so that we can actually have a longer range precision fires, and as well as multi-domain, so looking at land-based anti-ship missiles. In the defensive area, we're all working areas of high-energy lasers, and so there's some activities looking at mobile SHORAD, which is short-range air defense, as well as high-energy lasers for tactical vehicle demonstrators for IFPC Block 2. So I just want to end there and give my colleagues a chance to answer as well.
So, Mr. Langevin, thank you for the question. The National Defense Strategy brings into pretty sharp focus for us that we're in a high-end fight. That's where we need to focus the efforts of our technology implementation on board our platforms. It also puts a premium on speed. So I associate myself with all the remarks that you've heard about this topic so far, but it's the speed of moving that technology at scale to the platform so we get it in the hands of the sailors or Marines or the airmen. That's what this National Defense Strategy has done. It's juiced this whole process. We're thinking differently about how we create pathways to move this technology through the snake, if you will, to get it all the way to the end point. So that's what's got us thinking hard every day and looking for new opportunities. And I would just close with the fact that instead of being a let's go manage risk, this is more of an opportunity-based focus. Let's find the opportunities, let's figure out how we take them, put them in evidence, and create that deterrence so that when they look at us, they understand, here's what you're up against. Thank you.
Sir, I just amplify what Admiral Hahn just talked about is the speed. The NDS is clear on the use of experimentation prototyping and advocating for that. And I think in the Air Force, we've wholly embraced prototyping as a way to speed delivery to the warfighter, and I think that's going to be key to in the future.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll go to a second round.
Yes. Ms. Cheney.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Walker, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned in both your written testimony and then here today that we are no longer dominant. I think you used the phrase across all scenarios. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that a little bit and talk specifically about, have decisions been made that we won't attempt to achieve dominance? Have we determined that there are certain areas where we simply are going to accept a lack of dominance, except being second to someone else?
I think what I meant by that was really in the context of lethality, trying to think through new warfighting constructs that would allow us to really be more effective, to have multiple constructs that we can set up against our adversaries so that they're surprised, they're not anticipating the next fighter aircraft or the next tank. They know that we're building, but we're putting systems together in new ways that will surprise them in the end. And so trying to think through not the next system, as Mary said, not developing necessarily the next system, but focus on the mission and understand how we can put multiple systems together in different ways and surprise the adversary.
Maybe we'll have an opportunity to follow up in a closed setting about that particular issue, and in particular areas where we may now have decided that we're going to see dominance. And then my second question, I'm not quite sure to whom I should direct this, but it's about hypersonics and the extent to which our obligations under the INF Treaty are having an impact as we're looking at design, as we're looking at testing. To what extent are those imposing restrictions on our testing of that system? I'm not sure whose question that is.
I think we're certainly conscious of the INF Treaty. We are developing hypersonic systems that would be compliant with that.
And so I guess the converse of that would be if we were no longer the sole nation bound by the INF Treaty, we would have a wider range of testing we might be interested in doing with respect and able to do with respect to hypersonics?
That's fair.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Miller, the budget for science and technology represents about 2.3% of the total budget. Is that about right? Is that about right? Is that enough? You have to answer more quickly than that. I only have 5 minutes.
I would tell you that Yes, we could do with more. Right now, you have an increasing top line, thanks to the administration
Right.
looking favorably on the Department of Defense. The majority of that money did not go into the science and technology. It went into getting us whole for readiness, and that was the priority. As we invest in science and technology, we need to have the money to take it out of science technology into programs of record, and we have been having that conflict of maintaining a ready force and being able to pull technology into new systems.
And I understand Secretary Mattis's concerns on readiness and the O&M, but it just seems that we've been ringing the bell a little bit on, and we've heard it here today, about the investments our competitors are making. And yet, I know there's more money in some parts of the science technology budgets, but not in all parts. And I think as a percentage, it may be lower than it was in the 2000s when I first came here. I've got to double check that number. It's a long time ago, and my memory's getting bad, but it might be lower as a percentage. So I guess I just want to, if we are truly concerned about this, it seems, since we've lifted the top lines, that science and technology needs to have a higher priority at the department than it's getting.
I would say the fact that we have an undersecretary for research and engineering who's 3 weeks and 1 day in the job, as we build the next budget, you will certainly see his influence.
I'll make a note of that. Admiral Hahn, can you talk about the impetus for the establishment of the Robotarium at Georgia Tech?
You have that right, the Robotarium.
Okay.
So clearly, if we can provide an opportunity, a sandbox, if you will, where we can get vehicles in a setting where they can be operated safely by a number of folks remotely who may be coming from different spots in the United States, either locally or all the way across CONUS, to be able to iterate our way through the use of robotics in a variety of scenarios across a number of domains, we're going to learn faster. So the Robotorium investment created that ecosystem, if you will. And
so that's at Georgia Tech, and so is it just ONR money? Is it university money?
No, there's some National Science Foundation money there as well. Other contributions are invested in there, and it's probably not the only place we should be doing that, frankly, because I think this is an area where we get the smart people really helping us iterate our way through how are we going to work through this man-done-man teaming. How do we get vehicles working together? So any opportunity to make that a more prevalent sort of a sandbox approach in other places is certainly welcome.
Yeah, well, it's something that has interested me, and so I'm glad to hear you're interested in maybe replicating the concept or growing the concept, and I think it's worth exploring. Dr. Walker, as far as DARPA's, not your specific plans, but do you still see yourselves as the 10 to 30 year look part of our research team in the Department of Defense?
Yes, we
longer
do.
term. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
And do you feel that you can take enough risk in order to make mistakes, in order to be successful on that long-term look, or do you feel pulled back at all?
No, I do feel like we have a risk-tolerant culture. I mean, we don't set out to fail, but we do fail along the way, and we know we're having an impact when we do because we're reaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's enough for me. That's great.
Okay,
appreciate it. Thank you,
Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you all for what you're doing. Ms. Miller, I have a question for you first. Last year, I worked on a provision that would allow the new IP office to address IP data rights on SBIR transitions, including serving as a liaison between DOD and SBIR companies when IP issues arise. Could I please have an update on how we are implementing this provision?
Sadly, I'll have to take that for the record. The SBIR office will become part of the USD R&E. It currently has not been attached to that. It belonged to the small business office, and so I don't have that information with me.
Okay, well, then please take that for the record. And hopefully you can answer this part as well. I'm also interested in your implementation of NDAA Section 1710, which started a pilot program to streamline the commercialization of SBIR and STTR products and services, including encouraging a multiple award contract for these products and services. Can you give me an update on that?
Again, I will have to take that for the record, sir. I'm not prepared to discuss it.
Okay, well, I will look forward to that, and
Yes,
thank
sir.
you for offering to do that. And then, Dr. Walker and Mr. Stanley, I have a question on space situational awareness and battle management command and control. What is being done to fix these two things, these two important issues, and how quickly will we close the gaps?
Well, sir, on battle management, command and control, we are about to start a new program called Blackjack, which is looking at developing a large constellation of LEO satellites that will provide the ability to do command and control, ISR, and other missions. We're going to do this by leveraging the commercial sector and plugging into what they're doing. So this program is starting. It's starting with the Air Force. AFRL is a full partner, and Air Force Space Command is very interested in the concept for trying to integrate space and the tactical warfight in a much bigger way than we do today.
That's good to hear.
Sir, as you know, space is becoming a very contested territory for us. We have set priorities in our investment in building a resilient multi-layer space architecture. One of the prototyping programs we're doing right now is called Global Lightning, which is utilizing commercial satellites to do our space situational awareness and communication structure. It's a prototyping program right now to demonstrate the feasibility. Those are the kinds of efforts we have underway to build that resilient architecture we'll need in the future.
That's really great to hear. I'm glad that you all are working diligently on that. I appreciate it. And I'll take some answers from you on the record when you're able to get back to us. And I appreciate it. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Veazey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask specifically about some of the technologies that you're concerned about that our adversaries may have, and how you feel that we're being able to, I guess, rise to the challenge of being able to bring us up to speed technological-wise on some of our systems. I know that, for instance, that there's been a lot of discussion and talk out there that the Chinese and Russians, that they're able to get certain systems up and going while we're still sort of working on things and still going through the technology aspects of that. I didn't know if you had any sort of insight on that at all. Yes.
Sir, the one technology that keeps coming up in my mind that I get concerned about is biology, just because of there's several reasons, but the fast pace of tech development in that field. We at DARPA started a biological technologies office about 4 years ago because of this very issue. One of our core missions is to prevent technological surprise, and so we wanted to be ahead of the game. So we have just as an example, a program called Safe Genes, which is looking at understanding how gene editing actually works, and then developing capabilities to reverse it, as well as prevent it from occurring in the wild if we need to, because our adversaries have done something. And so this is a program, it's an unclassified program, it's a basic research program at this point, but again, it's DARPA trying to understand the technology so that we're not surprised by it.
If I could just pile onto that real quick, sir. It's not any specific technology that causes me concern, because every technology that we are interested in, China's interested in. They leverage much of our basic research, everything that's done out in the open. What bothers me more is the lack of structural impediments that they have to move those technologies from a university setting or a commercial setting into a military application. There are no structural impediments. In fact, they've lubricated that system to a point where if there's direction to move it, it goes. We don't enjoy that same kind of streamlined system by design. Not saying we need to change our design in that manner the way China has, but we certainly do need to think through structurally how are we going to do this differently so that the great work that's done on sort of the S&T side of the business and that we see every single day in our personal lives, when it comes time to apply it to naval warfighting or the rest of the fight, the joint fight, we've got good pathways to get it there. So that's the part that worries me, is our ability or inability to move at speed.
When it comes to creativity, how are they doing on that? Because I know in the past that's always, been an issue with China, is that yes, they're able to produce technologies and they're able to copy technologies, but as far as creativity is concerned, sometimes they lack in that area. Are you starting to see them catch up in the area of creativity?
Short answer is yes. So the creativity factor is there. It's not lost on me that the same places that educate many of their scientists and researchers are, in fact, the places here in the United States that educate ours. Their sophistication about military applications, the CONOPS or the concepts of operations that those would fit into, are not that much different from ours. So this notion in the National Defense Strategy to start to create dilemmas, create surprises like Dr. Walker indicated, that's becoming more and more important as we consider the use of technology and how we apply it and put it in evidence every single day.
Thank you. Dr. Russell, did you have anything?
I guess I'll just add on the are they just copying what we're doing? I think in the area of quantum, there are some areas where you can see that they have actually, the Chinese in particular, have actually been able to do satellite communications where we have not done that in this country, which is a step beyond where we're at today. So it's not purely that some of our near-peer adversaries are just mimicking or replicating the work that we're doing today, but they are beginning to lead in several of these areas. And I think part of it is driven by what Admiral Hahn mentioned, is there's a lack of barriers to be able to transition and move technologies that we face here in this country today.
Thank you. You're back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for allowing me to ask a couple questions. I'm not on this committee, but anytime Dr. Walker is in the room, I want to come in and chat about hypersonics. So my first questions, Mr. Larson put a couple words out there that I think we should all be very aware of, and that's risk tolerance. I think that what we have done over the last maybe 30 years has gone into a society that we don't want to take risk. Unless it is perfectly ready to go, we don't do it. So my question is about some of these more advanced projects that we're working on, like hypersonics, which we've been doing for 60 plus years, but we are now calling them advanced, and X-plane programs that we have kind of let go beyond the last couple decades, but now we're trying to revamp them, and I know NASA's got their New Horizons projects. But let me ask the panel, where do you stand on X-planes? Where do you stand on kind of prototyping and getting something from a prototype to an action, to a weapon or an airplane or something very quick? And that might take some risk also.
So I'll start and say, in the 3 weeks, 1 day that my boss has been on the job, he has certainly made it clear that he embraces the authorities that are given to him to do prototyping and experimentation, and to do it with a purpose. When he was in his confirmation hearing, he talked about the major prototyping efforts that used to happen in the past and how we learned so much from those, and how they did, in fact, give us capability that we can operationalize very quickly. I anticipate that we will see more of that as we all embrace the use of prototyping to help speed capability to the warfighter to make sure we get it right.
Sir, as you well know, the Air Force was built on prototyping, and we're getting back to our roots right now. As you mentioned, the 2 hypersonic prototyping programs as a follow-on to our partnership at DARPA right now. In addition to those, we have a low-cost attritable aircraft program that's a prototype out there. We have the Spectral Halo program, Global Lightning program. And what's made us be able to do this in the past couple of years is first the Section 804 language that increased the prototyping mindset. And then secondly, we've got a BA4 line specifically set aside for Air Force prototyping that we've really leveraged in based on our new warfighting construct. We've tried to allow that line to be our exploration line to see the art of the possible.
Let me follow that real quick. Do we screw it up here in Congress? Because we get projects out there like the airborne laser or some project like that that shows great promise and shows great action. And then funding is cut on a program that was about $12 million. Or something happens that we don't take that to the next step and say, this is something that we can absolutely use in the future. I just worry about every time we stop a project, that data stops right there. And then when we pick it up a decade later, we have to pick up data that is already a decade old. And other countries can pick up that data, whether it be hypersonics or lasers or whatever we're talking about, use that data or steal that data, which many countries are good at that. And then they're 3 steps ahead because they've used our 3 steps of R&D to get them to maybe operation. So, you know, these are blanket statements, but I think everyone understands where I'm trying to go with this. Congress needs to be good at saying, go do this, we're going to fund it, make sure it works, and keep going. Because whatever it is, I could pick 20 projects out of my head right now that have gone to a data collecting position and never to the next step. So I'll leave you with my last 22 seconds. Hypersonics, are we moving fast, Dr. Walker?
We are, and that's we're about to, I should say. The new budget has given us a lot more money and the Air Force to basically take what we've been doing and what we're going to fly next year and prototype it into operations. So I'm excited by the new budget and the ability to do that. The services are looking at hypersonics and at looking at incorporating that into a new construct for fighting wars in the Pacific and elsewhere. And I think we'll be moving out, especially as Mary said, under the new USDR&E, who is an aerospace engineer and has stated publicly that hypersonics is his #1 priority. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. You'll have to take the rest for the record. We have time for the second round of questions. Votes have been delayed a bit, and I know members have additional questions. My question, Mr. Stanley, you mentioned additive manufacturing in your opening statement, and that is a technology that is of particular interest in my district, and it's an increasingly important transformative capability for the department, especially as we're able to use critical materials like titanium and other metals. So first, I want to ask Ms. Miller, what is the department's approach to additive manufacturing? What is being done to support the adoption of these capabilities?
Well, we have a National Manufacturing Institute that was focused on additive manufacturing America Makes, and that was started in, I think it was in 2012. That finished, the National Manufacturing Institutes were set up for 5 years of government funding, and then they were meant to be self-sustaining. In that particular effort, Mr. Stanley might be able to follow on because the Air Force did pick up and add resources to them because we're finding great benefit of that particular manufacturing institute. Additive manufacturing, as all the services will tell you, has been something that is part of our discovery of how it can benefit across the many disciplines that we have.
And before I turn to Mr. Stanley, who I am going to follow up with, are there ways for the department to validate or ensure that the manufacturing processes are uniform to guarantee trust in flight safety or other critical parts?
That is an effort that the services are deliberately making to understand that if we can 3D print something, but we need to know that every time we print it, it's going to be the same and have the right attributes. I know I personally was at AFRL last year and saw them working on how they do that. It's an area of research, and yes, we need to do it.
Mr. Stanley.
Ma'am, additive manufacturing is a key fundamental building block for our systems going forward, as you've quite eloquently talked about. In addition, we're putting a lot of resources behind that certification process of these additive manufacturing designs and products that we're spitting out. So that's an important piece. We've got to come to agreement amongst the services, amongst the other agencies, the FAA included, on how we certify additive manufacturing parts for airworthiness and flight safety.
Do the other services want to add here?
Certainly do. So inside the Navy, we're taking an all the above kind of strategy to work at additive and advanced manufacturing mechanisms where they make sense. So if we can push a 3D printer out to the edge and have a sailor or marine print a part that's appropriate to relieve a logistics supply problem, that's great. But the hardest thing is going to be to get to airworthiness, or near and dear to my heart, something that I'd put on a submarine and take that ship down to test depth and depend on that. And at the science level of this, we need to understand what's happening at the microstructure when we now take that same material that we know exactly what happens, or pretty well what happens when we forge it or we cast it, but now we create a little molten pool at the micro level and create a part for it. That's much, much different. So that's significant research that needs to be done. We're doing it together, which is the good news, and we're doing it nationally, which is the better news. And once we get that, then we unlock the design space, because once you capture that digitally, then you can understand how now I can remove weight from that part, I can get the exact attributes I'm after, and I can manufacture it differently, cheaper, with more fidelity, more repeatability, using these advanced manufacturing techniques. So it will unlock quite a bit, and we need to get an advantage there and then keep it.
Dr. Russell?
Yeah, I agree with most of my colleagues, with all my colleagues. The one thing I might add to it is it gives us the ability to be more adaptive to the threat. So as an example, we have a program currently in the Army, in making small UASs, instead of producing 700 UASs, what you might do is produce different capabilities and then have the ability in theater to produce a small UAS capability that would adapt to the threat that you're actually seeing. So instead of going to an industry and say, well, we need 400 or 700 UASs to support the mission, you actually would produce them in real time and be adaptable to the threats that you're seeing.
Ms. Miller, one more follow-up. You mentioned the National Manufacturing Institute. How are you leveraging the private sector research and the innovation that's happening in additive manufacturing?
Well, through that particular institute, we do have, it was kind of, the National Manufacturing Institutes are almost a pilot for that private federal partnership. And it's been very effective. We have, I think, over 45 industries that are part of that consortium in working with the government and trying to create that national capability. So I think we're leveraging them fairly effectively in that particular space, and actually the rest of the institutes as well.
Thank you. Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thanks to our witnesses. Admiral Hahn, let me go back to something you said, which I found interesting, in that you talk about China's agility, that they don't have the same kind of limitations that we have because of the structure that exists. Not to replicate what they have, but how can we make our system more agile, especially when you're talking about technology? It seems like those types of limitations really on us now really have us proceeding with our hands tied behind our back if we can't move with the kind of agility that needs to be when it comes to technological advance.
So this is the $64 million or billion or trillion dollar question, I think. And it goes back to, I think, a little bit of Mr. Knight's thread as he kind of walked through the question, are we messing this up? And not that the Congress is messing it up, that we're together, I think, messing this up, in that we don't recognize the continuum of activity that must occur to pull one of these things through. We're going to fail sometimes, which needs to be okay. Because I fail doesn't mean that the funding is going to go away. because I failed doesn't mean that we're going to stop the project. We got to continue on. We're going to move through different levels of expertise and different phases of this as we move ahead. And many times when that happens, at least inside of the services, we change the people who are involved. And the expertise goes from, oh, that's the science part. Now it's into the engineering part. Well, not really. It's all a blend, right? And more as we find these threads that we need to pull, we need to maintain our focus on it. So I'm particularly encouraged with some of the things that I see happening in the Navy. The CNO and the Secretary, as well as the new ASNRDA, Mr. Gertz, have put a laser focus on some things that are important to bringing some lethality and some of this technology into the fleet and force. One of those areas is directed energy with our Navy family of lasers. And in and amongst that, we're taking more than one approach. We're not putting all our chips into that technical approach. We have 3 or 4 involved with that. We recognize that we're going to learn as we go. We've broken the problem into pieces so that a state-of-the-practice fiber laser is being used to integrate onto a DDG-51, a destroyer combat system. That's a hard problem in and of itself. If I combine a state-of-the-art laser, then I'm doubling or tripling my problem. So we're thinking through ways that we can divide the problem but keep the focus and set up a series of, if you will, frog races where these things are going to bump along at the pace that technology moves. Some may be better than others, but at the end point, as soon as it's ready, we want to have figured out the way to get it onto the ship, the plane, or the submarine, or in the hands of that Marine, and not have the funding fall apart as we go through. So I applaud the Air Force for their dedication to this BA4 activity that they protect as sacred to prototype and figure out a way to get that stuff fielded. So that's the right answer, and you know, we're trying to replicate that. We require your advocacy and help to keep those things going, because a lot of times it's the certainty and the continuum of funding across this set of activities that becomes the impediment. Thank you.
Thanks for the answer, Admiral. And I think we have to have this philosophy that it is okay to fail, and as long as there's good lines of communication between the R&D community and the Congress, we can take these leaps together. And you know, sometimes if we're not failing, then I like the Elon Musk's philosophy with his people that if they're not failing, they're not trying hard enough, and we need to be okay with failing sometimes, as long as we're doing it the right way, and there's good communication. Let me just, it's kind of a related point, Ms. Miller. As I stated in my opening statement, I believe the reorganization provides an opportunity to rethink how DOD delivers the most advanced capabilities to the warfighter in the near, mid, and long term. And so related to all this, for instance, it provides an opportunity for the department to bridge the valley of death so that so many technologies and companies fall victim to, as well as provide an opportunity for greater leveraging of the DOD S&T ecosystem like labs. Can you please describe how R&E will work with the acquisition and sustainment side of the department, and how DOD's S&T ecosystem is being leveraged to its greatest potential?
Yes, sir. With regards to the R&E and the A&S partnership, and it does remain a partnership by necessity, the USD R&E was given the authority to take that risk, to move fast, to fail and learn and try and use prototyping and experimentation to better inform, one, what the technology risk is and to drive it down where we can, and to inform requirements. Because as you well know, acquisition is based on the requirements and getting those requirements right. And one of the things that all of the services, I think, would agree with me when I say sometimes we get requirements that were given to acquisition that aren't really what the warfighter wants. And the experimentation venues that the Undersecretariat was given, the ability to do prototyping and experimentation, are helping to refine that before we get launched. So we will do those risky things and try to drive down risk and inform the requirements before we launch formalized programs of record. And then we go into those programs of record and we have a better chance of success. The partnership is there. We need the acquisition guys to be the sounding board for when we're really crazy and we can't get the program there. And we need to be the guys always telling acquisition, you've got to take it to get that next step beyond where you are. Don't just settle for an incremental change. and I think you're going to see that.
Good. Very good. Thank you. A little bit.
Mr. Larson, do you have additional questions?
Thank you. First, Ms. Miller, I apologize. I did not see that you're a Washington Husky, but I'm glad you are. So, yeah. And on that point, my other son, my one son is there, other son's in actually engineering school at a different school, but it brings up the point about the workforce and the STEM workforce, the pipeline to create. And some universities, including the UW now, have changed, they haven't changed the requirements so much to get into engineering, but a lot of the larger state schools, you got to apply to the school, get in the school, and then while you're there, get the grades to apply into the engineering school or the business school or so on. And some of the larger schools are changing that because, for whatever reason, it's providing a more opportunity for domestic students to get into these schools. And so this really gets in the question about the availability of the pipeline, the availability of the workforce, if it's necessary to have U.S. citizens or not, and what that means for you in terms of recruiting for the workforce that you need to continue to do the work that you're doing. So it's all kind of related, but I just wanted to, it's really about that availability and what things can you do to open up that pipeline. And have you thought through that?
We have been thinking through it. It's a concern for all of us because a STEM literate citizenry is not only important to the Department of Defense, it's important to the nation writ large. And so actually the services and OSD and the Defense Industrial Base have been doing what they can to incentivize this STEM pipeline, as you put it. All of the services reach down into the early grades on up to get that resonance of wanting to be in STEM. What we've been trying to do is champion additional incentives to keep U.S. citizens working into the higher academia, like PhD programs, so that they will work in areas of national defense. This is an area where in many disciplines we get foreign nationals that will be doing that work and doing that PhD thesis, and the U.S. citizens are going out and getting jobs. And it does not help us when we see reports where, gee, you can get out with a bachelor's and start to work right away, and you can make more money than somebody who can get a PhD and took 7 years to get there.
Right.
That is not helpful to us. However, it's up to us to, one, we give them good problems to solve in the Department of Defense because we have very challenging problems, but we need to help them make sure that that's the choice that they want to make. So we are offering scholarships to help incentivize them to go into discipline areas that will help us. And we are looking at how we can make it more enticing to keep them in that area.
So are you exploring at all the ability, you have a flexibility to bring people in and out? So on the National Guard side, you got cyber warriors, folks who can give you a weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, and you can bring them in, you can bring them out when you need them, as opposed to making them commit to wearing a uniform for 3 years.
Yes, we are absolutely looking at the flexibilities of being able to bring people from academia, industry, into the government and send them back out again. Sadly, if you are a government employee, when you go out, you sometimes have limitations, and there have been some of the language that's been provided is being interpreted in a way that folks don't have the flexibility to come in and out and not be held I guess prevented from working in that discipline, and that's something we're working on. How do we make sure that we do not disadvantage people that want to come work in the department? But the way the world is right now, people want to change jobs frequently. They want the experience, and we want to maximize our ability to do that.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. I yield back. Go Dogs.
That's it for our questions. And in closing, I want to thank the witnesses. I want to thank the members, both the subcommittee members and the non-subcommittee members, for their excellent questions. And I want to reiterate the quote that I included in my opening statement from Jim Mattis, who recently testified, quote, "Our competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare: air, land, sea, space, and cyber. From my perspective, it is our responsibility as policymakers and as a Congress to ensure that we don't lose a competitive edge in any domain or in any technology, particularly as we look at what 21st century warfare looks like in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And I also wanted to reiterate Dr. Walker's comment where he stated one of the founding missions of DARPA was to ensure that the U.S. is always the initiator of strategic surprise. That's something that we need to continue to focus on as policymakers when it comes to our S&T portfolio. So thank you very much for the testimony today. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.